The theme, I think, for leaders is just continuing to nurture a more complete view of what is required to implement these technologies. A facet of the discussion right now is how long is it going to take to get to general AI, where machines truly learn and act as humans, can pass Turing tests and things like that.
This is AI for Leaders by AI Leaders. Practical, to-the-point content helping you drive results with AI. Here's Chris and Frank.
Hi, welcome to the AI Leadership Podcast. I'm Frank Strickland.
I'm Chris Whitlock.
Chris, we get the question not infrequently, are you really retired? It seems like anytime we're doing anything beyond just breathing and having a pulse, people want to know if we're really retired. Well, we've taken the entire winter off from podcasting. So when you ask the question, the answer is yes, we're retired. #retirement. You did some traveling this winter. Good time?
I did, yeah. I had a blast, and then just have had a lot of personal time for fitness and otherwise. But yes, it's been great.
Yeah, cool. I just spent a month in Costa Rica. I am working on my Spanish, and I also spent a lot of time working on my tan on the beach. It was fabulous. It's spring here in Washington, and so it's tolerable. But we have not gotten to the Costa Rican flip flops, t-shirts, and shorts weather yet. But I'm waiting. I'm waiting. Um, so, Chris, speaking of retirement, those who are interested, we got a lot of good feedback on the 3-episode series we did on retirement, actually how we think about retirement, how we're processing it, what retirement feels like, how it's working for us. And you can go to our YouTube channel, the AI Leadership channel on YouTube, and check that out if you've not seen those episodes. 3 episodes on retirement. Beyond the financial stuff, you got plenty of advice, on how to manage your TSP or your 401k. This is more kind of how do you manage your life beyond just the financial. But Chris, 3 episodes for our listeners, or 3 segments in this episode for our listeners. The first being a new one, we're just going to talk about a few things that we are seeing in the wild relative to AI. And those will be just quick thumbnails of things that we find interesting that leaders ought to be learning about. We'll put some things in the show notes to help people research, read, learn more. Then we'll segue from that into the second segment, where we're going to give people a practical tool to mitigate the risk and drive results with Gen AI and large language models. We think that will be applicable to every government and industry listener to this podcast. And then we'll wrap up in the third segment talking about our second book, which we did not plan. We did not plan a second book. I'm loath to say there won't be a third book, but we certainly didn't plan a second book. But we'll just give people a thumbnail of the second book that we have coming out in April. Spoiler alert, it's related to leading large language models in Gen AI. So, seen in the wild, Chris, 3 items that we have. I'll go first. Large language models, as the name denotes, are large, tens of billions to hundreds of billions to a trillion plus parameters. And with size comes cost of computing, comes the amount of infrastructure that you need, lots of attendant implications in addition to performance that come with the size of these models. There is an effort that you highlighted, Chris, back about 6 or 8 months ago in our LLM training. 3 things you talked about leaders should be watching for. And one of those was quantization.
Yeah.
Fundamentally, quantization is just a compression technique to get these large language models down to a smaller level that are still performant, but are smaller and therefore do not come with the same amount of costs to kind of train, deploy, and operate. It was interesting to me, Chris, and kudos to you in that 3-item list that you gave for leaders to watch for. Quantization was one of the 3, and Ben Lorica came out last week with his 2024 themes and topics of AI that people should be watching for. And he had about 7 things, and one of those was quantization. So
Interesting.
we'll
Yeah, I've
post
not
a little
seen
bit.
that yet of his, but that's interesting.
Yeah. So we were ahead of the time there a bit, we might say, but would just encourage leaders to tune into that. Very important in terms of managing the cost of these models, both development and operation. Chris, you posted something interesting on LinkedIn today around electricity. Talk a bit about that.
The theme, I think, for leaders is just continuing to nurture a more complete view of what is required to implement these technologies. A facet of the discussion right now is how long is it going to take to get to general AI, where machines truly learn and act as humans, can pass Turing tests and things like that. But uh, it's easy to underestimate the things in the background. And this year, I would argue, Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, has given us two factors that, in effect, are pacing items in the what's, in my view, is going to be a long journey to get to general AI. But one of those is electricity or power. And he had said at Davos this year, and it got quite a lot of attention, that in effect, people are underestimating this need. And in order to get to general AI, we are going to need to solve a particular facet of the nuclear power problem that has been very challenging, or cheap solar. Would be another way to do that, or a complementary way to do that. But his point is, we cannot meet the power requirements for developing and operating these sophisticated capabilities. And there have been a number of articles on the electrical grid in the United States, electrical power production, and one in the Post today is a really nice recounting of that. And basically, it highlights three big demand drivers for electricity that we're not equipped to meet today. One of them is AI, even AI in its current manifestation. Data centers and then Bitcoin related operations are three that are big challenges and impediments. And if you think about the power sector, we have generate power, we have to transmit power, and then distribute it. What the article gets at as well is, in the United States, and all of our foreign counterparts are going to have similar challenges. But in the United States, it's not simply a generate more power problem. You've got to be able to move it where it needs to be. The transmission capacity, transmission grid is not what we need in the United States right now. And demand is outpacing supply and capability in multiple states, and beginning to cause problems. And it just reinforces, I think, what Sam offers up. It's easy to underestimate the journey, and the journey is not all about math models. And it is not good to have your perception of the challenge be how simple is the interface to use. There's a lot of other factors that are at play behind the scenes, and some of those don't even have to do with compute or the models themselves.
Yeah, I data point for our listeners that I found fascinating in that, Chris. He talked about a $7 trillion investment in energy. Just to put that into context, that's 25% of U.S. GDP in last year. So,
Well, and that
non.
actually, that 7 trillion is for the other pacing item, which is around the semiconductor sector. He is saying, then these are really the two that he's highlighted this year. One is, we can't make enough of the right kinds of semiconductors, and
Mm,
this industry is not postured well for that. He's trying to raise $7 trillion for that. And then separately, he's saying, oh, and we need to solve, nuclear fission and cheap solar, and we got to fix the grid. What's a lot of money? And these are predicate factors to get to the infrastructure needed, both for developing general AI and operating general AI into the future. And I think with any reasonable expectations about gains in compute performance and things like that, it's going to be a long time. We're looking at a decades long journey to get to that place. Decades long.
Mm, yeah. And just again, highlight it for everybody. We were talking here in the context of getting to general AI, where, yeah, machines are thinking in the way humans would think and reason. So, um, good to be aware, as you said, Chris, of the limitations. So, the third item, Chris, and it is one that has been of interest to us since we started AI Leaders, is in the area of managing quality and leading quality. Um, Again, I picked this up off of Ben Lorica's podcast of one of about 7 themes that he highlighted for 2024 in AI. There is a body of work. There's an AI research company called Anthropic. And again, we'll put a link to this paper in the show notes. But they have done some work around creating a methodology to elicit values from stakeholders and then code those values into the training of an AI model and use those values for reliability, for quality, for assessing bias, all of the things that would kind of go into the safety and security and quality concerns around AI modeling. And it's quite a fascinating area. It's an important area. It is one that we have been addressing in our training. We're going to come to an explicit facet of that in just a moment in the second segment of the show. But it's striking to me. Ben said that, and Ben's not some, he's neither a hype meister nor is he histrionic about the robots are going to take over and kill all of us. He is a master data scientist. He's coding models, he's fine-tuned training LLMs on a weekly basis for his own purposes. He's very engaged in boards and in the VC community, etc. So a high quality source. And his comment was that he expected an entire industry within the AI market largely to evolve starting this year that is just focused on coming up with these automated tools for AI quality, for AI model quality. And so we'll put the link to that paper in the show notes, but this area of quality we think is important. It's fine for those of you in DOD, at the State Department, at Commerce, et cetera. Fine for those of you in industry to publish the types of written policy statements about AI quality and trustworthiness in the AI modeling, et cetera. And that's fine. You've done the thinking and the documentation of what the values might be, but that's got to get into code in order to get implemented. And the work Anthropic has done is one approach to getting that type of thing, those types of policies into code. So that wraps us up for a few things that Chris and I have seen in the wild. We are going to segue now off of that quality issue in the second segment to give you something very practical that we think you can use in mitigating the risk and driving results using GenAI and large language models.
Yeah, I think this will work in orienting everyone. It's something that's central in a lot of what we've communicated over the past year. We refer to this as a risk ladder on the left-hand side of the graphic, and then 4 quality factors that you should be mindful of, whether as a user or certainly someone who is driving development or experimentation with LLMs. And the simple message, we believe, is somewhat like roadway controls or traffic controls when you think globally. There are a list of 6 tasks. Some of those we need to be really careful around We need to not only have lane markings and regularized safety features that help us to control what is going on, but even New Jersey barrier in some areas. We don't want vehicles crossing into certain zones, etc. But on the bottom of this risk ladder, there's an area that we would refer to as the Audubon zone. You should, as a leader, encourage aggressive experimentation and work in the bottom part of this ladder. And very quickly, I'll orient you. These machines do quite well if you are giving them a large input. They're context sensitive. So give them an input and ask them to refine it to a standard. The bottom three tasks all represent that class of activity. It's refinement, whether that's to an editorial standard, a translation standard, and that translation can include voice to text, interlanguage translation, Spanish to English, or code translation, Java to Python, Python to Java, and vice versa. And then summarization in a variety of forms. How do I take a larger input and shrink that down to something digestible against a standard? And that standard can include length, emphasis and formatting, things of that nature. These machines perform well there. You still need to consider just lane markings and safety features. You need to consider certain tasks in the development and the design. Now, when you go to the top of that ladder and you're just using this in an enterprise to answer questions, you want a user to interrogate the system and get a response, you need to be careful. And there are some areas that are prone, no matter the range of mitigations you put in place, they are prone to error. You can reduce or mitigate, you cannot eliminate. And so getting your head wrapped around where can you go fast and aggressively to use this technology to your advantage, and where do you need to be pretty deliberative and careful to include in the testing and evaluation against the kinds of factors that we have here, which we won't explain right now. But that is something we would encourage that you have in mind is what's the nature of your experimentation? What are the types of tasks you are envisioning that this do? The more you're working the bottom end of the ladder, the safer you are. You still get all of the advantages in speed and inherent quality aspects which are beneficial, but you're avoiding some of the problematic manifestations that are just very difficult to work around in a rigorous professional environment that requires truthfulness and accuracy. That's where you need to be careful at the top of the ladder.
If this content is of use to you, we encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel and give this episode a like. If you're listening to this episode on Apple or Spotify, please take time to give us a 5-star rating. And if you have a moment, leave us a quick review. You'll find more resources like this podcast and training courses at our site, aileaders.com. Let us know what you think. We value your feedback.
So, Chris, in this third segment, we're going to let our listeners know about a second book, a new book that we have coming out next month on a playbook for leading Gen AI and large language models. Let's just start here. November of 22, ChatGPT released in the wild. So it's been out there for 14, 15 months. 14, 15 months later, there's really no need for a book on a playbook for how to lead AI. Everybody's got it, Gen AI. Everybody's got it figured out now, right?
No. Yeah, no. And that, I don't mean that in a disparaging way at all, but I think we underplay the actual technical state of knowledge and awareness for leaders in multiple capacities on this. And it's natural that we should need to learn. It would actually be naive, extraordinarily naive, to assume everyone has this down. patently they don't. We run into manifestations of this regularly in misunderstandings of it, and maybe to me, Frank, one of the biggest challenges is not underestimating the developmental challenge in putting these things into place, while at the same time grossly overestimating what they may be able to do in a routinized way in the context of a workflow with professional quality standards as a requirement, not for creative purposes where they can be extraordinarily helpful, but the kinds of things we would deal with in national security. Professional standards, truthfulness, and accuracy is extraordinarily important. What do you need to be able to do, and what can these do effectively and routinely in that context? I think we're still relatively early in the journey, actually.
Would you say that, Chris? So that's Gen AI. If we kind of back up to that's the far end of AI complexity. If we kind of back up into just kind of advanced machine learning, would you say that we're kind of well over the horizon in terms of implementation of advanced machine learning, and deploying those models into operations is pretty routine now?
I would say there is a lot of it, but I would also, my characterization would be there are still a significant number of workflows and processes that can benefit from this. They have not to date, not because the modeling may not be pertinent. It's because it creates a software integration challenge. It creates a programmatic integration challenge. There are a number of things that can impede both development and adoption there. And I would say there is substantial historical work on foundation methods and advanced methods in machine learning, substantial, and we shouldn't give it short shrift, but there's still a lot of playing field left to exploit and to create advantages in.
Yeah, you don't underestimate and don't overestimate points. We've had a fair number of people in industry that have gotten really uncomfortable as we have unpacked those and substantiated those 2 points in our training, because what they hear is, oh, you guys are not advocates of AI. So let me just point out to the listener community. Yeah. Let me point out the listener community. The name of the little boutique that Chris and I started is AI Leaders. It's 30 plus years for each of us in the algorithmic, advanced analytics, algorithms, and AI community. We're all for it. It kind of reminds me of some of the space remote sensing people we used to work with, Chris. The moment that you would question, hey, you can't really geolocate that emitter, to under 10 meters 7 out of 10 times. And they would just bloomers all in a twist. Oh, you're trashing my system. It's like, no, we're trying to help operators understand realistically what they can expect 7 out of 12 times, 7 out of 10 times out of your system. Um, so we are coming out with a book, folks, a second book. It is a playbook. Chris used the word ethos in talking about our first book, that the book had a very practical, implementation oriented ethos. This book is the same way, probably be the same for any book that Chris and we're probably not going to write any mystery novels, Chris. Is that fair to say? Probably not.
Yeah, and it's not a big conceptual piece. Yeah, I agree. No novels on the horizon.
Yeah. So the book has an introduction which will help business executives really understand what is an LLM, what is Gen AI, and how does it work. It kind of lifts the hood, and it's a little bit technical, but it's written for non-technical people. I think for our technical listeners and the people who are data scientists and who are AI practitioners, they can derive value from that section in learning how to talk to those that they're serving about Gen AI and LLMs in a way in which they the constituents, the stakeholders will
We
actually
don't do
understand.
that uniformly well. We
No.
don't do that uniformly well.
Yeah. So then from that, the heart of the book has 4 segments. We call it a playbook for Gen AI and LLMs. And so there's a segment on planning. How do you do the planning and we're thinking about not an individual project. We're talking about deploying this technology at enterprise scale. So how do you think about and do the work of planning? Then designing, integrating. Chris mentioned integrating into the larger software application. There is just a lot of work to be done in that area. And frankly, sometimes in the data science community, there's just a lot of naivete or indifference about the work that needs to be done on integration. And then evaluating once you've integrated and put it into operation. So planning, designing, implementing, and evaluating 4 meaty segments with frameworks, with principles, with techniques for leading Gen AI and LLMs in each of those 4 areas. And then the book wraps up with zooming out a bit and talking about Gen AI and LLMs in the context of an AI strategy. I alluded to this a moment ago, Chris, but it's fascinating. You have this conflation now of Gen AI with AI, and it's like all of AI is
And
Gen
it's
AI.
unhelpful.
Very much so. So, so we give again business leaders or mission leaders, operators, an understanding of AI and a way to think about AI in a full spectrum sense, because your objective is to drive the performance of your organization. Your objective is not to deploy Gen AI. And so it's a very powerful tool. It's good for some use cases,
That's a
but there are
great
other
pithy
things in
way
the
to
AI.
summarize the focus. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So, so that is the book. Um, we hope that that is of interest to you. We'll give you more info as it is getting ready to appear out on Amazon, and hope that will be another useful resource. So, Chris, welcome back to a new year of the AI Leadership Podcast. Uh, for this episode, thank you for listening. We appreciate you.
Indeed.